I swear this review hasn't been prompted by a certain TV series I've seen advertised on the side of buses, although I guess I probably should watch it now that I finally played Halo Combat Evolved for the PC. Yeah, up until this video, I had never played what's arguably one of the biggest games of the last 20 years. I guess it could stem from the fact that I was such a PlayStation tragic during that period, but better late than never. And while I was tempted to play the Xbox original, which I bought for a literal $1, I've been hankering for some PC action and couldn't get Microsoft Flight Simulator to work. Back to the fact of Halo being void from my life until now, I'm purposely going to skip a lot of the development history and associated stories as I usually do. For such a big game, there's not much left unsaid. I will, however, delve into what it's like experiencing such a massive game for the first time so many years later. I warn you, some things I'll be saying might upset die-hard fans, and I can understand being defensive over such a game and the series as a whole. I'm sure Halo has been a huge part of many gamers' lives for a very long time. There are key games from my childhood I would never review for this exact reason. The reviews would just never be realistic. But I'm hoping that you might appreciate an entirely fresh perspective. So, hold on to your butts. Bungie's original Halo seemed to have quite the development history. Long story short, it started as an RTS in 1997, eventually transitioned to a third-person shooter, and finally became an FPS when Microsoft purchased Bungie in 2000. Halo Combat Evolved became a launch title for the Xbox in 2001 and went on to be nothing short of a sensation. When considering the number of copies sold compared to Xboxes out there, something like 33% of Xbox gamers owned it. That's impressive. Fast forward a few years, and Halo was ported to the PC by Gearbox in 2003. That's what we're seeing here. For a console port, I was surprised by how demanding the game was hardware-wise. I originally installed it on my Windows XP machine, but was surprised I couldn't run it at full spec with a Nvidia GeForce MX 440 and a 2.8 GHz Pentium 4. Instead, I switched to a Windows 7 PC from about 2012, which understandably handled it fine. Now I'm sure most are familiar with the storyline, but let's recap. It's quite detailed if you're a sci-fi fiend like myself. You assume the role of Master Chief, an egg-headed super soldier that's been cybernetically modified. It's the 26th century, so we all fly spaceships, colonize planets, stuff like that. Humans are happy Elon Musking around the stars until a collective of aliens known as the Covenant take issue and starts a religious war. The game begins with the Covenant attacking a planet called Reach that's a major human settlement. They destroy the colony, but the spaceship, Pillar of Autumn, escapes and attempts to lead the Covenant away from Earth. You're aboard this ship in stasis, and are revived just as things are becoming a spicy meatball. It's here the ship encounters the mysterious Halo, an artificial ring world. Since the Pillar of Autumn is heavily damaged, the ship is handed over to an AI known as Cortana that orders an evacuation and crash lands the ship into the mysterious structure. Cortana is then along for the adventure from this point onwards and currently resides in your Windows Start menu. A fitting retirement or some sort of sick purgatory? You decide. Fast forwarding a bit, the Covenant intend to use Halo as a weapon, and it turns out the structure is infected with a parasitic race called the Flood. Shenanigans ensue, and off we go. So, look, overall, I liked Halo. That's the summation of this review, but I'll get my grievances out of the way first. The tagline is Combat Evolved, right? Because it seems like a keen-footed fish leapt backwards into the ocean when compared to other shooters of the era. Nah, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to be that harsh. Gotcha, didn't I? But real talk, here's what annoyed me first and foremost. You can't run. I honestly thought I was playing the game wrongly at first and spent a decent chunk of time scrolling through the controls menu trying to figure out what the run key was. It doesn't exist. Frankly, I found this baffling. There is a lot of corridor shooting, which I'll elaborate on shortly, but there are also massive maps with huge amounts of combat. The fact that Master Chief just ambles along like he's heading to the pub for a sneaky 11 AM Bloody Mary after a big night out left much to be desired, especially since you become the centre of attention of all enemy weaponry the second you step into the war zone. Simply, being able to run in these environments would be a strategic advantage. The second aspect I found bizarre is that you can't aim down a weapon's sight while firing. I'm not referring to scopes either, just a plain old sight that was a mainstay of FPSs of the period like the first couple of Call of Duties. Firing from the hip sucks. Lastly, I have an objection to a portion of the level design. The large maps when you're kicking ass with your fellow soldiers are awesome and are easily the highlights of the game. But there is a lot of corridor shooting. While this isn't such a sin for a game of this vintage, the game reuses a lot of what I refer to as kill rooms over and over. Large segments of levels are made up of these, and they just go on and on. Room after room, running around very similar layouts until an event happens, and you're required to reverse direction and do them all again. A lot of it feels like filler, and makes you yearn for the larger outdoor areas. Okay, enough whinging. What does it do right? Well, basically everything else, honestly. The story is already a highlight, and I love the large open areas. The weapons are great too, even if you can't aim them properly, which were a huge contributor to the success of the multiplayer back in the day. You can only carry 2 at a time, but there's a huge amount of variety to mix and match as you go along. The human weapons are easily the best, and feel the most satisfying to blast an enemy to bits with. My personal favourite was the shotgun when combined with interior levels. You can use Covenant weapons too, although these feel underpowered when compared to what's available from Team America. I only used them if I was desperate and couldn't locate ammo for the former. Laborious kill rooms and backtracking aside, the level design is also superb. Snappiness is the name of the game, and you're never left trying to figure out where to go or be at risk of becoming bored. It's non-stop action for the most part, with a lenient checkpoint system coupled with a quick respawn. The campaign is admittedly quite short, clocking in at approximately 10 hours, but honestly, what a ride. To aid in the journey, there's a selection of vehicles to drive and pilot. These range from ground vehicles like the Warthog and a massive tank, to Covenant rides like the Banshee. All include weapons, but a nice touch of the human vehicles is that fellow Dubros will jump in and help. This includes banter as you go, which is always appreciated. As an extra note, one of the Covenant ships can even fly. This is used on a limited basis, but adds an extra dimension of gameplay to the maps where it's available. It should be noted that Halo brought regenerating health into the mainstream. There's no need to scurry around for health packs like similar games of the time. Just cower behind a rock for a moment and you're ready to get back at it. I'm sure some see this as a negative, but it's so common now that to have it in such an old game is noteworthy. On that note, Halo includes great enemy AI for the early 2000s. For example, the lowest level of the Covenant, aptly named Grunts, will scare, throw their hands in the air, and run away when outgunned. That was a nice touch, although I wish I could run. As a whole, the Covenant are very dynamic in how they react, especially in the larger environments. It seems they can adapt to what's going on, like when the Flood enters the scene and they start attacking each other instead. It was fun watching them kill each other from a distance and then picking off the victors. The Flood isn't as great a foe, however. Their strategy is just to appear out of nowhere and overwhelm you. I guess this does add variety to the gunplay, but feels basic compared to the Covenant. Graphically, there are the usual hang-ups for a game that's old enough to legally drink anywhere in the world, but the aesthetic remains. This translated well into the remaster. The audio department at Bungie took full advantage of the storage capabilities of a DVD as well. There's not much music, as it's sparingly used for moments of impact, although it is great when you do get to experience it. Otherwise, you're treated to a high level of ambient noise from the Halo itself, or background war noise. This is held up incredibly well, and is still to the standards of a modern blockbuster. Otherwise, there is a lot of dialogue, over 8,000 lines apparently. You'll rarely hear the same thing twice, and there's even a random Australian guy.
Sir, the captain needs you on the bridge ASAP. Better follow me.
Is that what I really sound like? I can't mention Halo without multiplayer, but for this review, a mention is all that it will remain. I don't want to risk connecting my Windows 7 PC to the internet, lest my bank account gets drained by hackers. But, as you probably already know, it was considered good. It appears there are still ways to play, even though the GameSpy master servers shut down in 2014. Should also be mentioned that there is no offline co-op in the PC version. Stick to the Xbox version if you want that. Spend the dollar. If you don't wish to play off an original disc and get it working with modern operating systems, Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary is less than $12 on Steam. It is a remaster, although you can switch to the original graphics if you wish. The remaster itself is actually over 10 years old though, so it's going to look dated either way. Besides the somewhat baffling criticisms I gave at the start of this review, I can totally see why Halo was such a groundbreaking and popular release. It has spawned many sequels and other media, including the new TV series. Maybe I'll give the other entries in the series a go, maybe I won't. But at least now I can say that I finally played Halo.